I think that you've got two types of people who get involved in sports, or maybe more than two types of people. I'd be wrong to say that. We've got those who are simple administrators, we've got those who are investors. We shouldn't forget that there are many missions behind developing sports. But certainly, those who get involved in the administration of sports, many have got caught behind and are caught in time. I say that because they take the helm, they try and follow whatever statutes there are, whatever ways forward there are. And depending on which part of the world that you come in, you can do that. So if you come from a part of the world where there's a massive budget, either by government or the governing body itself raises the money, then it is that you can sit down in a wonderfully comfortable chair. And then, according to the EXCO, the board of directors, dissipate funds, manage it, look for accountability within the bloc. If you come from Africa as we do, chances are you do not have the funding for whatever dreams that you may see fit and have. You might be one of those people who believe this is the way it's done in the West or in the East, and therefore you are owed something. If it's as in the case of Africa Rugby, you get a budget of less than $1 million a year, which you then spend on the whole continent of Africa. You know, and I know, and everybody else knows that this is just not enough money. The question is, what do you do about it? Do you go beating your head and saying the World Rugby have let you down and waiting for that rainy day that the skies will open and the monies will suddenly appear against programs, knowing perfectly well that competitions will be lacking, development programs will be wanting, and that the federations on a continent that is essentially football-led are going to get so left far behind that you're not going to be in a position to achieve what it is you set out to achieve? Or do you take the view that I've always taken, and it's a view I've taken from when I was running Kumasi Asante Kotoko, that we had to turn it around, make it more appealing to potential investors, which we did, change the rules and regulations that are involved governing player outlook, Medicare, and everything else, look at the statutes with which we operate and make sure that they're comparable globally to anywhere in the world, change the optics and the vision, the image, to ensure that the pathway that you put together is one that is in sync both with the development of what happens on the field, but more importantly, knowing that you have to win off the field. And it's the winning off the field that ensures that you have development for skill sets and opportunities on the field. We have a track record, and we did that in football. We've had a track record which we did through various consults in different areas of sports. And we have a track record in which we did this in other areas of life at different and various moments in time. I got involved in rugby, not necessarily because I wanted to, because I'm very clear when I get involved in things, I understand there's a global standard, and that global standard should enable me to push out my chest and take on all comers in the quest to get equity for us in Africa. There's no point in going and begging. There's no point in standing still and hoping that a status quo will just fall on our heads. And I'm not into committee after committee, subcommittee after subcommittee. I'm into compliance. I'm into good governance. But I'm into a global approach and saying, actually, what you think is good over there, we can do even better over here, because I'm so proud to be African. I have no hang-ups about color. Being African is not black or white. It's about really the salt of the earth. As one person once said, being able to smell the ground after it has rained or just before it's about to rain, and understanding the pain of the people. Without understanding the pain of the people, how can you possibly transfer a vision into the way that it's meant to be? So I got involved in with rugby, not because I played, and I've been lucky enough to play provincial rugby when I was much younger in the United Kingdom. I played provincial rugby in Zimbabwe. I've had one cap at that level, and even first-class rugby in the UK at various points. But rather because a number of people kept pushing for 8 or 9 years, please get involved in the administration of the game, please get involved. knowing perfectly well if I did, I would upset people. Because there's no point in getting involved if you're going to do what was not good enough yesterday. It's so important to get involved and push together a vision, especially here in Ghana, where we are not a rugby playing nation. We don't have it in the school systems. We don't really understand it. We are footballers. You know, we have a past history of boxing and athletics, but certainly not rugby. So to take it on in the few years we've been here and try and get people to understand that there's a professional code to being an athlete these days, which comes with a level of self-discipline, that comes with a level of confirmation to how things are done, but also understanding you cannot do it without money and capital. And in my early days, where I went through and had meetings with various development officers, they said, oh, you can't do it, because they expected that we would be a union that would sit back and wait for funds to come from African Union and then creep along. But the fact of the matter is that in 4 years, we have received for the development of our game virtually nothing. We've had some training for coaches, but certainly not enough. And I'm not blaming Buja here, the current president, outgoing president. He must be applauded for his efforts. He must be applauded for the Herculean task that he's had to embrace in his way, which was appropriate 10, 15, 17 years ago. And at the end of his tenure, nobody should be seen to say he hasn't done his bit. He has. But the fact of the matter is that time has now moved on. We can't stay in the same melting pot. We cannot. We cannot stay in the same melting pot that says in 4 years, we have had no money to develop our game. And therefore we look at our model and say, how have we been able to attract private capital wealth into a game that is not as structured as well as football or other sports in a country that nobody knows, which is what we've done in order to develop a GIR program, which is within the top 10 best within Africa, to develop a women's program, which cuts across all ethnic divides and is led in many parts by the Muslim community in Ghana, and to devise a vision that has brought Ghana to the top of the 1D section in West Africa, to enter into the Bronze Cup, and the first year out to win the Bronze Cup without any equipment, scrummaging equipment and other related equipment, but by networking and bringing together some of the best. So the Colin Osborns of this world and Stuart Amars are teamed up with Dallas, so we've got Zimbabwe, the UK, South Africa. As technical help, we've got Dr. Ross Potita, a sports doctor from South Africa that's involved in the game, where we look at everything from nutrition to management to etc. and making that work. And to be able to fund ourselves and ensure that we comply. We have complied with World Rugby and Africa Rugby. We've instituted and pioneered the scrummage system ahead of many countries around the world here in Ghana, and followed to make sure that our AGMs and everything else that we do is in line. Now, many other people may do the same. The fact of the matter is that 4 years ago, or whenever it was that I got involved in Ghana Rugby, I went to the first Congress and immediately threw my hat into the pile to serve on the EXCO. And then withdrew at the last minute. Not because I was new, because I don't believe that the older you are, the wiser you are. I don't believe the longer you've been there, it means you know more. But simply because I know that when you are as radical as I have, with a track record, it's better you feed from the outside and let them know what you expect, which is that by this time, unions should be better funded. By this time, our voice in terms of World Rugby should be better heard and backed up with a sense of achievement, compliance, understanding of better governance, and results therefore on the part. In Africa, we've got powerhouses of whom we've got to be proud of. We've got countries like Kenya that when you switch on the TV and watch sevens, and even to their near qualification for the World Cup, they're a joy to behold. We've seen countries like Uganda progressing steadily along and also doing particularly well. And that's great to see. My friend, President of Ivory Coast, I told him the achievement of Ivory Coast going to the World Cup many, many years ago was a massive achievement. And there are other countries have reached the zenith at various points, but perhaps have not had the funding or support. And yes, we can all go and pick players from Europe and say, oh, you played rugby, come and play for us to represent on the continent. We have tried, by and large, to develop players from scratch, some of whom had never played rugby up until 2-3 years ago, to reach that point. But the fact of the matter is, to get involved in a leadership contest, which quite frankly is going to be difficult, because African rugby still looks at the world in terms of English and French. We haven't reached the point where we no longer have the shackles of colonialism on us and look at it as rugby for all. And therefore, you look at the last 15, 17 years, the voting has been straight down those lines. But the fact of the matter is, if people are brave on the continent, then before the end of our term, every single union will be receiving funding from us, not from World Rugby. World Rugby will provide their own for getting into rugby, but we'll be providing funding that will ensure that the development of their game, of their leagues, of their structures can be not really better administered, but gives hope. When I look at how they train in Togo and in other countries and the facilities and the lack of, you have to look and be sad, extremely sad, and wonder, are we really saying at Africa Rugby that we cannot enjoin with private capital wealth to take the budget we receive from World Rugby and times it by 10? Are we really saying that? We cannot present a better image of who we are to global capital, so that global capital looks at us differently. And therefore, by the end of the first tenure, you've now got enough money to start developing competitions and games to the point where there is greater integrity, greater belief, and greater confidence for others to invest their money to take us forward. I haven't seen it in 4 years. And I have reached out to the heir apparent from Tunisia. I have reached out. I've reached out to all his assigns, because there are many assigns who have sent messages that they've already been elected ahead of election day for positions, and that's going to be interesting in itself. And said to them, look, it's not about who runs or leads Africa Rugby. It's more a question of, are we now moving into another area? Are we hailing and giving support to the past president and saying, you have done well, and we thank you. Your time is up. Are we now moving to the point of saying, this is our program, and our program is destined to take a radically different course in order to bring funds and money in? And I've spoken to many of the heir apparent's assigns and received no joy. So yes, we throw in our hat without the expectation of changing the world, unless people understand that colonialism is a thing of the past and it is gone, or whether it is they're brave enough to say, we buy into this vision, not because it is talk and rhetoric of a sports politician, but because there's a track record that has shown it in the past and can certainly deliver it going into the future. And I said to a few presidents who've called me, because my phone has been inundated with calls, and they said, today is the deadline date. The deadline date is on a Thursday to make submissions. And I've said all along, no, I'm not going to run. I've been waiting for those who assume the seat is theirs without contest to come forth and give a justification as to why we need to stand back down and see them bring us a new light, a new future, a new way forward. And it hasn't happened.